All right, hello everyone. Okay, so today we are going to talk about doing gender. This is an incredibly important one. Might go a little long, and I apologize for that, but I want to make sure I get to everything. So let's go ahead and share this screen. Starts where we were last time, so let's go ahead and pop back out, pop into doing gender. All right. And again, there'll be Wallace and Persis, as I will probably touch on a little bit here because it's an example of what doing gender is all about and how you can take a theory and then turn it into research. So I think that's important. So the key takeaways, we're going to power through these as quickly as possible. I know I'm windy and I am wordy, and but I do think that this is an incredibly important understanding about how we how and why gender is a social construct and not just something that is inherent or falls under that binary in such a particular way that we can't break from. Okay. Key takeaways. Gender is constructed by psychological, sorry, I'm struggling today, cultural and social means. By that, I mean to say that, like, again, we've talked about how it's different in different cultures and different, like with the things like kilts. I keep falling back to that example. I'm not entirely sure why, but I'll find some more things in different, like through social means, through social sanctions, through social, through lifting up when someone meets some ideal expectation of what it is to do that gender, right? We have these pros and cons that form and shape our understanding of whether we're doing it correctly, of what we need to be. Media is a big source of how this happens. We also learn this within school systems. We learn this within peer groups. We learn this in every aspect of our life in some form or fashion, right? Religion plays a form. Our institutions of education are a big way. Our families shape us from the time we are born until we get into any of these other institutions, right? They shape us by you are shaped in your gender context before you are even born. You are in that womb, and we are so many, like we have so many gender reveal parties, and we have all these things when we don't understand that gender is something that someone else, that we do as individuals, but it's imposed on us in ways too, right? So think about the last baby shower you attended and or someone you know attended, and depending on what gender they assume the baby to be, which really is more about sex, right? Not gender. That person is inundated with either pink or blue things. And the fact that we have made a color, a gender, again, an inanimate object, seems silly, right? But there are cultural implications for that, right? So if I wanted to wear nothing but black and dark blues and greens, that may be more appropriate because I'm an adult. But if I dressed my child, who maybe was identified their sex as female, in nothing but blues and greens, no one would be able to know what that baby's gender is. And that would cause some kind of like this panic, right? Or they would assume that that baby is a boy. Why? Because we have created this social construct around what a baby wears determines or like implies what this baby's like essentially genitalia is, because that's the only identifying marker we're really assuming at this point. And so let's be real clear that that baby is not doing gender. Their parents are doing gender in conforming and constructing the ways that they will understand the world as they progress in that. Now, when that person becomes a little thing that gets to go to Target or to Walmart or to Meijer or to, you know, even to one of the resale shops or my favorite consignment sales or what have you, and gets to start picking out their own clothes, if they go in there, what are they going to assume that their choices are? Their choices are going to be based on what they have learned are appropriate for them, and they're not going to necessarily branch into those things that they feel are less socially appropriate for them. And that's part of how we understand that gender is something that is social, is something that is implied and pressed upon us, and that then we act in our own ways at the points in which we can. And we do gender by conforming to those, by pushing back on those, by producing and providing our own space and presenting ourselves in the way that we want to express the things that we need to express within a specific social context, right? So whether or not I decide to like wear a full suit, or whether I want to wear a dress, or whether I want to this might depend on the social context or what social sanctions I may get depending on what I wear, or depending on how I want to do this. The fact that I consistently choose not to wear makeup is an expression of my own gender, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I am not presenting myself in a female way, right? So like, but we have these social cues. Now, if I was to get all makeup up, wear my hair long, put the curly on, make the lashes way big, put the big dress on, I am very clearly trying to prove and to present myself in a very effeminate way. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Do not hear me wrong. But that is the way I would choose to present my gender. I choose to do it in a different way, right? And I am presenting and producing a different atmosphere. Now, I say that wearing a very purpley pink shirt. So, well, the point here being that those things are constructed based on these sociological and psychological processes that we learn from a very young age and are then progressed into. And it's something that as we learn and understand gender, we want to deconstruct, and we also want to like have some questions about, or have some reservations about, why we feel it's so necessary for this little cute thing that at that point is just cooing and cawing and not really doing anything specifically gendered. Is it so necessary for us as especially American humans to present that individual as their parents or as their aunts or uncles or brothers or sisters, to present them in a way that proves that they are specifically one gender within that binary, and why as a baby that would matter. And I don't think it does to that baby in any capacity. They don't care, as long as you're cooing and calling back at them. But it matters to us as humans because we want to make those snap judgments, and we want to be able to put people in these categories that we've constructed as a society. And that is something that, as sociologists, we want to examine why we do that, examine what benefits it has, examine how it shapes and forms the options, choices, and lived experiences that these individuals have, that society has placed on them, and as individuals that we place on ourselves, or that we bend or push back on within our own society. I hope that makes sense. We also want to talk about this, and again, that's part of this hostage idea that we get into with Weston Zimmerman and talking about doing gender, right? We are hostages to our own ideas of what gender are. We gender personality traits. We gender what it means to be assertive. When you're very assertive, when you're very intellectual, those things have been historically rooted in how we understand male. When we understand and see it as women, they may be called bossy, they may be called bitchy. Like these things being something different when you're expressing very, very similar psychological functions, personality traits, ways of being, but them being labeled specifically different things, is a way in which to assert that we want these categories in one hand and those are beneficial to this specific binary member, but not necessarily to the opposite group's binary member. And it's part of why the binary doesn't work. It automatically doesn't work because personalities range within those binary shapes, those binary male and female things. They vary so much within those, and there's so much overlap that them being inherent or instinctual does not make sense because there's so much overlap. Every personality trait you can find in both sides of the binary. Now, how we socially construct when we find those is impacted very much by this binary idea and construct. And we want to make sure that we're paying attention to this difference between what is and what is like inherent and what is something that it's not necessarily inherent. People have personalities, but how we emphasize if those are good or bad are very much tied to our binary construct and very much tied to what it is we are trying to gear specific people to, right? And we'll get more into that as we talk about family, as we talk about labor, as we talk about work, as we talk about multiple other things. And so we uphold the binary specifically through social norms and social sanctions. And these are things we talk about in intro classes, but they're things that I want to touch on again because they're incredibly important when we talk about doing gender and performing gender. And we talk about this way that that is done as an act of resistance, and or the way that might be done as a way to conform, and how society then pushes back based on through interpersonal actions, through institutional actions, through all sorts of things, right? And social sanctions can happen at multiple levels. We talk about this, we can talk about this at a level of institution or even systemic levels. When we make it illegal for people who are pushing back against that binary, and or someone who is presenting themselves or doing gender in a way that we don't feel as a societal level is appropriate, or even a group within the power structure doesn't feel is appropriate, there can be pushbacks in the ways of laws. We see this a lot when we talk about any kind of transgender exclusionary legislation. So when we talk about military engagement, when we talk about even having bathrooms in public schools, when we talk about medical intervention, all of these things are things that when we do gender, and gender is not necessarily, and we do this in a way that pushes back or changes or broadens the idea of what that binary construct is supposed to look like, or pushes back against that binary construct, there can be very much social sanctions in very institutional or systemic ways, not just that interpersonal, hey, I don't understand, or you have this very androgynous look, I can't place your gender, so I'm gonna have this puzzled look, this interpersonal relations where I'm not sure. That has implications for the individuals in both that situation as well, and can provide social sanctions and or can emphasize social norms within that, hey, like I don't understand, right? But at the same time, those things then play out at a much bigger scale when those social norms are not met. And that's when we get into those kind of institutional and systemic oppressive forces. And we want to make sure that as we understand these things, we are talking about how much really our binary, like our two binary categories, overlap and form more of a gender spectrum, and more of this idea that like a personality trait doesn't necessarily have to be gendered, a color doesn't necessarily have to be gendered. And the reason it is more to do with society and not to do with its inherently, blue is not inherently male, right? Pink is not inherently female. In other cultures, could be completely the opposite. And in other cultures, there are things where purple and pink are more masculine because they're brighter and they're fiercer, right? And they're more forms of red. These things are very masculine. So it very much depends, and that's what we really want to harp on, and is that it depends. And so that makes those categories, when we're looking at them, feel less set in stone. And that's what I want you to get. That's what I want you to be thinking. And there's going to be pushback. You're going to have pushback within your own feelings of this, but wait a minute. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for what I know? What does that mean for what I've been taught? What does that mean for the things that I may have thought were not okay? What does that mean? And it's okay to feel those things. It's okay to, through this process, examine how we feel, how we have imposed the social sanctions on someone we care about, or how we've how social sanctions have been imposed on us, how these things might have impacted the choices we made or the limitations we might have had in our lives. And it's okay to sit there and think about that. It's okay to own that there's nothing wrong with having new information, processing that, really realizing the level to which we gender everything in society, and having a way overwhelming moment. Okay. So I want to validate that, and also want you to push yourselves to really think through the ways you've been gendered, the ways you have gendered others, and the ways those gendered ideas that you have impacted how you feel about institutional and systemic level impact on others' ability to present themselves in the way that may feel right to them. Okay, so let's I just want to get into that. We also want to talk about how this relates to more sociological things. Goffman's idea of gender display, this like, right, so we talk about gender presentation, we talk about doing gender, but this display of gender, this idea of what is displayed and what is viewed, came from one of our forefronts in theory in Goffman. So I want to make sure that that's touched on, that's realized, and that's within there. So make sure that you're paying attention to that, because it's important to really understand how, again, those theorists from before are then worked, utilized, and we make theory based on ideas. See, again, we're talking about how science and research broaden, get more specific, talk about social context and grow, right? This is how knowledge can be shaped and formed. Again, we've touched on cultural variation multiple times. I'm going to keep touching on cultural variation for the duration of the semester. This is very important, and it is why so much there's so much evidence as to why this is not a fixed idea, and why our binary system doesn't necessarily isn't fixed, isn't innate, and changes those categories shaped and are molded based on the ideas of what that particular society's cultural context is in that historical moment, in that geographical place, right? Sorry about that. Una, stop. Thank you. Sorry, my dog decided to start barking. She's sitting in here with me. Again, we also want to talk about why the binary is so stuck on genitalia. Okay, so for whatever reason, in this society, in this cultural context that we have currently, we are incredibly fixated on the gender, the genitalia of someone, determining their gender. This is not helpful. When you walk around, everyone's genitals are not out. You do not necessarily see those things. So especially when we talk about kids from birth to like before puberty, none of those things are massively impacting the way they do life and making it inherently different, besides whether they sit or stand to pee, and most of the time that depends on how much they're potty trained and or how they were trained to be potty trained, right? So like it's inherent, like it's incredibly uncomfortable that we are placing so much on the genitalia of others to determine theirs, and why it is that we as a society have fixated on this. And I think that they touch into that really well in doing gender, and that's something that I want you to take note of. But I also want you to take note of it when you talk about your own personal life and your own personal experiences as you've walked through gender in your life. Like, how much of this is an understanding that men have penises and women have vaginas? Like, if we can't get past like that point, that anatomic point, and understand that, like, okay, great, but we're not doing that out in public regularly. Like, no one's seeing anybody's genitals. So like, what else determines how we view that I am female, or how we view that person in the grocery store, that grocery store clerk, is male? Like, we do this based on how they present themselves, the haircut they choose, whether or not they have makeup on, what colors they are wearing, what kind of cuts their shirts are, what kind of cuts their pants are. What, like, we do this and we determine this based on things that are not their genitalia. So why there's such an emphasis in that being inherently part of gender is part of the things I want you guys to reflect on. Is part of the things that I want you to dismantle a little bit in your brain, and part of what I want you to kind of meld through, right? The color blue does not have male genitalia. Therefore, it is not inherently male if you're going to look at that category in that way. There's irrational things that we're doing here as a society by placing things in such binary categories, and we want to make sure that we're breaking those down and really critiquing our own assumptions, right? And that's part of what this class is. There are parts that are going to be overwhelming and uncomfortable because we're going to be critiquing this and be like, but why the hell do we do that? Like, why are we doing that? And I want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that is based on knowledge, information, and research, and really just observation. We have a lot of observational data that, and even our own personal like experiences that back up how we have learned how to do gender and why it matters and how there might be variation in it. Again, so this is, and we talk about this, and this is going to bring in how we do this, right? What happens when someone is ambiguous? We talked about this already. We talked about how social cues, interactions, appearance, and performance, these are the 4 things, right, that really show us or provide us with that information on someone else's gender. It's why as we get more into a world where these things are pushed back on, or these constructs are really examined, you're going to see a lot more of those cues, those interactions, those performances, those appearances change, and they're going to be a lot more on individual, like those social cues are going to be different, right? Those things like pronoun usage on the end of an email, those things like there's going to be differences in what appearance looks like, right? There has been over the course of time anyway. We don't wear corsets generally anymore. We generally, as women, aren't in skirts every single day all the time, right? We're allowed to wear pants. That has changed. That construct of what female was has changed, and that's okay. And that's why we need to pay attention to how those social cues and interactions create or give social norms and social standards. Again, we're going to talk about how the binary is linked to difference, discrimination, and separation. We're going to talk about that so much over the course of the semester. I'm not going to harp on it a whole lot here. You're going to read some examples in Weston Zimmerman's piece, and that's important because it helps kind of provide that. But we're going to talk about it when we get to work. We're going to talk about it when we get to families. We're going to talk about it when we get to social change. We're going to talk about how these social interactions and the social construction of gender has been linked to difference, especially has been linked to discrimination, and has differentiated what roles are appropriate for whom, and how those things are changing, merging, and getting pushed back or not. And they gave a really good example of this when they talk about the female physician. When you look at female doctors and people who want to be doctors that are female, they are pushed so heavily into pediatrics, or they're pushed into like gynecology or neonate, right? Well, you're a female, so you obviously want to work with children or babies or women because that's what you know. Like there's inherent biases, right? And they're pushed and molded into these things. And when they choose to do other things, they have massive amounts of pushback and limitations and boundaries that they have to push through. And the same is for the opposite, right? When men choose not to be a physician but want to go into medicine as a nurse, or they want to go into medicine but they do want to be that, and there's some pushback. Well, why aren't you going to be a cardiologist? Why aren't you going to be, like an orthopedic surgeon or something that is maybe more prestigious, right? That we rank things even within professions, and we gear people and line people, and we put up obstacles and boundaries for what it is that they can do. And we want to talk about how that is limiting to humans in general, and how that it specifically is limiting and forms oppressive, right? And so we'll do that a lot throughout the semester, but that was one example of this. We also want to talk about where we learn about the binary. We've talked about this and touched on this a little bit in some of the other videos and even in this one, but I want to touch base on the fact that this happens at every institution, every group, or every interaction you have in the world, right? Like in your little world. This happens from before you are born. This happens as you move forward, right? And it will continue to happen. This happens in family. Family's a big one. Education system's a big one. Your religious functions, your even your bigger institutions or governmental institutions dictate what you can and cannot do. We're going to talk about that some too. We're going to talk about the laws that impact and discriminate, and or the lack of good laws to take away discrimination, right? We're going to talk about some of these things. And then again, they touch on this a little bit in doing gender, but I want to make sure that we're touching on this as we move forward, that binary structure is very, very powerful within a patriarchal system. So when you have a system that is operating on men are the top, men are the head of household, men are the people whose namesake matter. Men are the people who are supposed to hierarchically be structured at the top of the wages, top of the labor force, top of the things that get you means, modes, and opportunities. Then this patriarchal system, or the system that is based on inherently that the hierarchy goes men and then women, then you automatically have biases in there, and you automatically have structures in there that impact every institution and every systemic idea or law or mode that shapes how the society operates. And so understanding that that patriarchal system matters within this context is very important, because as you move into more matriarchal, or if you look at more matriarchal structured societies or groups, if you look at different tribes, you're going to see a different kind of shaping of gender because it's inherently shaped a little bit differently. And as you look in those systems that are shaped where there's neither a distinct patriarchal or matriarchal top, you're going to see again more structuring where there's more variation in gender, there's less of a very rigid binary, and those binary ideas are less prominent. So those difference, that opposite idea is very, very linked to patriarchal structuring. And it's also linked to heteronormativity. It's linked to that idea that, okay, you're opposites, but then you're going to get married and you're going to make babies and you're going to procreate. Poof, all is right with the world, right? This idea stems from this patriarchal structuring on how we needed labor forces, on how we needed people to keep reproducing. There are links to certain things in historical moments and societal moments that have created this need for binary systems and need for heterosexuality, need for patriarchal systems that we can now look at and critically reflect in a different way. And so I want to give an example of how a scientist took this theory of doing gender from Weston Zimmerman and then put it into practice within a research component. And we're going to talk about Wallace and Persis. And that's one of the optional readings. I think it's interesting. It's like a full whopping 3 of these little bitty pages. Like it's not a long read. It's quick and simple, and it can show you how you take a theory piece and turn it into a research piece. So I would advise that you do read it, just because it gives you an example of how to do this. And the research was based on doing gender, but they used the example of what you carry on you, whether you're carrying a purse, whether you're carrying a wallet, and what specifically is in those things, right? Notice the differences between when you have to carry a purse, you're carrying things not just for self, or like your ID and your credit, your economic stability things, your credit cards, those kind of things, but also you're carrying things that are care work, that are associated with providing for others. Notice how that's different than the individualized, very personalized things that you carry in a wallet are more for self. Notice how those things depict the differences we want to impose on that binary structure, that, well, women are for collective, women are for caring, women are for producing, women are for this, men are for inherently monetary things, therefore institutional things, therefore, right? So this little example of what we carry and what we carry within what is there. So what we carry via either a wallet or a purse, and then what we carry within those items, like the items we carry within those, impacts and shows the differences and the limitations and the options and the work and the social connotations for what we impose on gender. And so I think this is a good idea. It's a short read, it's quick, it's simple. It's just an idea of how doing gender is played out within a broader research population. Okay, so I hope you're having a good day. I hope you're getting this. If you have any questions, always reach out. And especially when it comes to this one, I want to make sure you're understanding the ideas, that you're getting it, and I want to make sure that if you're not, we talk about it and we can work through some of those things. Again, you're going to have questions. That's what the discussion board is for, so don't forget about that. And we are going to go ahead and talk about some of the optionals here in a second and make sure we run through what is due on this module. In that one, so make sure you watch that one specifically for what is due and those kinds of things. You have a great day. Bye.